Peggy's on.
Hi,
Good morning,
Peggy.
Peggy.
Hi, Peggy.
Good morning.
The getting shorter all the time, man. Well, Teresa just told me to wait until she finishes downstairs, but I'm not going to. We got plenty of time. So today I wanted to share with you some things about civil religion and identity. This is sort of straight up cultural geography, and it's something that I adapted from my teaching days, although I would used to spend at least a week on this, if not more. So it's a stripped down version of it. But I thought this might be another way of looking at all the things that's on a lot of people's minds, is all the dissension and antagonism between groups in the United States. And I thought this might be another way of looking at that, trying to have some sort of foundational thing for that. So I'm trying to stall until Teresa gets here. But let's go ahead and get started. So first we're going to talk about identity a little bit. Then we're going to talk about state religions. And then we're going to get civil religion, okay? And we'll see where we go with that. And as always, we'd love to have your input, your questions, and your discussion, and your screaming and yelling, and everything else that goes with all that, okay? So first of all, identity. For almost everyone constructs an identity for themselves, like who I am, who I want the world to think I am. That's an important question. We all do stuff that presents ourselves to the world that in a way that makes us feel affirmed, but also is the way we want the world to see us. That's what we mean by identity, okay? And this is completely comprehensive. It's almost everything we do is tied up in this, usually in ways which are subtle and not overt, at least in the way we think of it. We're not like, oh, I better do this because my identity is such and such. We just do these things. And it can be something as superficial as the clothes we wear, or the way we wear our hair, or the food we eat. It could be something as important as the things we believe and the things that we do. So that's what identity is all about. And we're going to talk about how the fact is constructed. So it refers to meaning, expectations, and perceived truth. So these are the things which are important. Identity means something. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. It means something. And you have an expectation that it's going to be received in a certain way by others and by people who are close to you. Often your identity is tied to how you want people who you love the most to perceive you, okay? And this whole idea of perceived truth is unless there's mental illnesses that we're not talking about right now, but unless one is really seriously mentally ill, you are living a life that you think is truthful, right? That you think is the right way to live. It would be a very bizarre existence to live a life that you knew was not the way you were supposed to live, but you did it anyway. Most people live the life that they want to live, or that they think is the right way to live, within the confines of their situation, and the parameters of where they live, and the money they have, and the people that are around you, and so forth. You have all these kinds of things which are, so this is all very complicated stuff, of course, right? So both individuals and groups construct identity. So each person constructs an identity, but groups construct identity. So our congregation is constructing an identity. That's what our meeting this morning was about. Who are we going to be? What are we going to be doing? Who do we want others to see us as? So groups do this as well. So And culture is fundamental to this. The culture is where we get our identity for the most part, our clues about what our identity is going to be. Culture is all invasive, all all engrossing. And the analogy that some people use is like a fish doesn't know that it's swimming in water, right? It just is. That's just the way things are. And culture is the ocean that we're swimming in. And we don't always even know that we're interacting with it and involved with it and doing something in that or being influenced by it. It just is, These are some basic ideas. And so I'm kind of hopscotching around a little bit right now. Is that my phone? Well, we're going to take care of that right now. I usually silence this before I come, but I forgot to. Okay. So one thing that's common is for groups or individuals to construct identities for other people. Usually you construct identities for yourself. And our congregation constructs our own identity. But perhaps you know that other people may construct an identity for us, right? And this happens widely through culture, in all cultures, at all times. I'm just puzzled.
I want so that Peggy can see you.
Oh, well, she's seeing this screen, isn't she? Well,
Anyway, keep going.
well, that's why she tunes in to see this beautiful face. So, and usually powerful forces are able to construct identities for other people that what they're really doing is constructing their own identity, right? We're not them. That's who we are, and they are those people, and they construct an identity for other people. This is really commonly done. It's, as I note here, it's fundamental to modern politics. No political candidate is the person that their opponent says they are. No, none of them are. And people who are unaware of what is really happening are going to buy into the constructed identity that somebody is making for that other person in politics or in life and so forth. So it's important to realize that that works even when those perceptions are not true, even when they're make-believe. All you have to do is get other people to believe it. And this is a major part of our culture, is people who are being convinced to believe stuff that isn't true or isn't entirely true. And as you might guess, constructing identity for others is often the basis for exploitation and destructive actions against individuals and groups. So you can imagine how this works. For a long time, the narrative was, people of color are this way, so they can't participate fully. That's not, excuse me, that's not true. It was never true, but that's what we told because it made us have a certain identity, have us have a certain status in society. Okay, so identity is critical to everything, and we all do it. Everybody constructs an identity. Every group constructs an identity, and it's done not usually overtly, but just by swimming through the ocean of culture that we live in, and we grab parts of it. Okay? Yeah. Right. So I'm sorry, it comes down to what? Right. You must be one of those, or one of some, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so that's some basic facts about identity. So what's important is identity is constructed. It's invented. We construct our identity. You're born basically as a squalling little naked baby, and you're just a blank slate at that point. And what happens from then on is going to be a function of what you're absorbing from culture, what you want to decide you want to be, what you want others to think you are, all of that. Okay. And we all go through this process. It's a really important one. And so constructing identity is all about bringing in bits and pieces of things to make who you are what you want to be. Okay. And most people construct an identity of what they want to be, again, within the confines of what's the realistic parameters of their lives. You may want to be a billionaire, but it ain't going to happen, right? That's not what we're talking about here. The fact that you want to have wealth is part of your identity, though. And we can ask the question of why do you want to have wealth? What does that mean to you, and so forth. And um, that's true for individuals and it's true for groups. Groups also do identity in the same way. And often, you associate with people who have an identity sort of like yours, and that's where groups get their identity from. So it's unlikely anybody's going to come and be part of our congregation that has belief systems which are completely radically different than ours. They're not going to feel comfortable being here, probably over the long term. Not all individuals and all groups construct identity in the same way. That's the basis of human diversity. And here what's important about humans is not any kind of genetic or physical diversity, which is very superficial at best. What we're talking about in diversity is cultural diversity, which is something which we've constructed. And my analogy is a simple one. Classical music, jazz, rock, and country music all use exactly the same musical scale. They use the same notes. They're just constructed in different ways, and that results in very different kinds of music,
And that's not counting the fact that in other cultures, Asian cultures, they use a completely different set of.
And they use I don't know if you've ever seen sheet music from Asia. It looks very different than our sheet music. And I have seen that, and it's really interesting. So if you construct culture, you can also deconstruct culture. Deconstructing is a process whereby we try to understand the meaning behind culture. Why do we dress the way we do? Why do we wear our hair the way we do? Why do we believe what we do? What does that mean? What is the implications of that? And that's particularly important. I mean, individuals need to go through that. Some great Greek philosopher, was it Aristotle, said an unexamined life is not worth living. So we need to examine our own lives and find out why we are who we are. It's important to do that occasionally. But for the most part, and that's more in the realm of psychology, cultural geography was in the realm of doing that for groups. Because groups can have their meaning deconstructed as well. And why they are the way they are, why they believe the way they believe, why they do what they do. That's what's important. So we're going to, music is cultural, and so we're going to go back to our music example real quickly. Music carries with it cultural meaning. The way a country song is constructed has cultural meaning, which is different than the way a jazz song is constructed, which has cultural meaning. But the meanings are different, and they're going to appeal to different people. So using music as our example, deconstruction means we can understand what the different meanings are of country and jazz music. And they mean different things. Which groups adopt that music and those meanings? And then why? The why is always the most important question. Okay, so this is a little bit about how identity works, okay? One final point on this, the importance of the past. Our culture does not like the past. We just don't like it. We say, oh, that's history, meaning you dismiss it because it's not important and so forth. We just don't like the past. We like the present a lot, and we don't think about the future very much, but we just absolutely don't like the past. We make fun of anything that's not absolutely current right now, you know? And this is unfortunate because culture exists in an unbroken chain that goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And if you understand that, so many things make more sense now. If you understand the evolution of that and where we got to where we are today. That's why the past is really, really important. So popular culture assumes that only what's current is relevant and important. And that means you prevent people from understanding the past and the meaning and understanding their identity. And so what we have is a problem, is people who don't understand their own identity and certainly don't understand group identity. And if you don't understand it, you can be bamboozled easily. There's all kinds of people in the world who make their living bamboozling people who don't know who they are. You know, feel uncomfortable about who they are. And there's all kinds of people who do that. And there's more now than ever has been in the past. So identity, both personal and group, is a result of past events. I mean, to some degree, it may sound trite, but we are who we are because of who we were when we were 5 years old, and 7 years old, and 10 years old, and something that happened to you when you were 12, and so forth and so on and so on. You didn't just come out of nowhere. You have context. So keep that in mind too, okay? So that's the identity part of the talk, okay? Now, questions, comments, observations. Yeah, we're just, and we have constructed a culture, especially a popular culture, that truly is focused on that, the moment right now. They don't want you to think about anything except the next TV show. That's what they want you to think about. And your 5 minutes of fame and then move on. And social media is overwhelmingly about that. They want to absorb you in right now, this instant. And it is designed, not overtly, but the implication of that is that you are therefore questioning, you don't know your identity. Your identity gets made up of superficial things, is another way of saying that. So you have superficial identities, and they don't last, and they are not going to sustain you. So. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, a lot of what we do is just killing time, absorbing time, you know, and sometimes it's in very superficial ways which, and there's nothing wrong with having downtime. I'm not saying that, but so many people, that's their whole lives. And that's probably problematical. So before we discuss civil religion, we want to talk about state religion a little bit, okay? So, and hopefully you'll see why in a second, okay? So we're gonna do a little history lesson now. Let's go back to Henry VIII.
He's the one on the left.
He's the one on the left. This is Charles III, who is current monarch of England. And we ask the question, why are these men the head of the Anglican Church? Anglican Church is what in the United States we call the Episcopalian Church. And over there, it's often called the Church of England. Okay? These are, both of them, the heads of that church. And I think they call them the supreme head of the church is their official title. Okay, so they're the ranking member of the church. Okay, why? And the answer is Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn in the year 1533. Okay, so this is the one place where knowing the history is going to help explain things. So Henry became king very young. He was a teenager when he became the king. He married young. He married Catherine of Aragon, who was a Spanish princess. He married her young. She was 6 or 7 years older than he was. And it was extremely important to Henry, as it is to virtually all monarchs at that time, that he have a son who was going to succeed him on the throne. And so Catherine started getting pregnant, and she had nothing but trouble with her pregnancies. She had 4 miscarried children, 4 stillborn children, and 1 son, 3 girls and 1 boy, and 1 son who was born alive and lived only 2 or 3 days and died. And she, out of all of that, she had 1 daughter who lived to adulthood. Her name is Mary. Okay. Henry was very frustrated with all of this. Of course, we know it's the man who determines the sex of the child, so it was his fault, but he didn't know that. But he blamed Catherine. Okay. So after 24 years of marriage to Catherine, she was about 40 and obviously not going to have any more children at that point. He was thoroughly upset with her and decided he wanted to annul his marriage. Okay? Because he couldn't divorce because he was Catholic. Henry was actually a devout Catholic early in his life. He was named a defender of the faith at one point by the Pope. And the Catholic Church doesn't recognize divorce. So you have to annul the marriage, and usually annulments are for like a good time when
Went to Vegas.
You know, you heard of Marie Antoinette. She was an Austrian princess who married the Dauphin of France, who became the king of France. And apparently, he was not interested in her at all, as a husband should be interested in his wife. That's a case for annulment. They never got annulled, but that's in a case for annulment. Being married for 24 years and having six pregnancies is not a case for annulment. And the Catholic Church said no, no, and no. And they kept pounding away at this and said no, no, no. We will not give you an annulment. He despaired of ever having a son to fulfill his throne when he died. So he found what he thought was a religious out. Okay, it's a scripture from Leviticus 20:21. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness, and they shall be childless. Now, Catherine of Aragon had been married to Henry's brother before Henry. His name was Arthur, and he died 5 months after they got married. And it was 8 years later when she married Henry. So it wasn't like Henry broke that marriage up. It was nothing like that at all. So Henry came to the conclusion from this scripture that his marriage was cursed because he had married his brother's wife. And this is the argument he made to the Catholic Church for why he should get an annulment. Well, Catholic Church didn't buy it because this is, as I say, an example of somebody who's distorting a scripture just to get what he wants out of it. You know, Because the scripture clearly, the context is, you shouldn't take your brother's wife if your brother is still alive. And the problem is uncovering his nakedness. That's a euphemism for having sex. Okay, so what it basically means is they were worried that if you are having an affair with your brother's wife, then both of you are having an affair with the same woman, and it's like you're having relationships with your brother, which is contorted, but that's the implication. So clearly, the scripture applies only if your brother's still alive. And in Deuteronomy 25:5 says clearly, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duties of a brother-in-law. So the scriptures not only say, in the case of Henry, he was perfectly within his rights of taking Catherine of Aragon for a wife, from the church's point of view. And it didn't take the church more than 5 seconds to realize this. And that's why they would refuse to give the annulment. So what did Henry do? Well, you all know the story probably. He just said, okay, we're not going to be Catholics anymore. And he took the whole country of England out of the Catholic Church, established the Church of England, the Anglican Church, made himself the supreme head of the church, and then gave himself an annulment from Catherine.
Classic.
Isn't that convenient? So I bring all this up because I'm going to do this. I'm going to leave the church and start my own. I want all of you. No, I'm just kidding. So what happened was he annulled Catherine. She died 3 years later from cancer. They think it was cancer. And he married almost immediately Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was the sister of his mistress. I don't know why he didn't marry his mistress, but that's beside the point. He liked Anne better. And he was sure that Anne was going to give him a son. And who was born to Anne? Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, one of the greatest monarchs in English history. That was Anne's child. And so what did Henry do? He accused her of treason for not having a son and executed her. Okay? Good to be the king, you know. So his third wife was Jane Seymour, died giving birth to his only surviving son, Edward. And so he finally got the son he wanted, but Edward was sickly his whole life and died at the age of 15. Edward actually succeeded Henry. Henry died before Edward, and succeeded him. He ruled from the ages of 9 to 15 as King of England. Then he died, and so Mary, which was Catherine's daughter, the first wife's daughter, became because she was the oldest surviving child of Henry at that point. She became the queen, and she died after 5 years. She tried to reinstate Catholicism because she was a devout Catholic. And so it was pretty turmoil kind of stuff. She died after 5 years. And then Elizabeth, who was, you know, the queen from the child of Anne Boleyn, she became the queen and ruled for like 55, 60 years. She had one of the longest reigns in history. Elizabeth II, I think it's the third longest reign in history. You know, I think Elizabeth II has the longest, and then Victoria, and then Elizabeth I. But Elizabeth was a Protestant, and so that ensured that England would remain as a Protestant country. That whole history comes around saying this: all kings and queens of Elizabeth since Elizabeth, have been the supreme head of the Anglican Church. That's what happens in state churches. Yeah.
And you cannot be Catholic and be a monarch.
You cannot. You can convert, but you cannot be Catholic and be a monarch. In fact, you have to be Church of England.
You have to, and that's why, I can't remember, that's why Queen Elizabeth II came in, because her uncle married Catholic.
Yeah, he married the American Catholic, who was a divorcee also.
Yeah, so he abdicated his throne.
He abdicated his throne, because the Queen couldn't be Catholic. So the Anglican Church is still the state religion of England, and it has always been part of the identity of the country, but also the identity of individuals. You know, they swear allegiance to the king, not only as a political ruler, but as the head of their faith. And this came to mind recently because Ray, our grandson, just became a citizen of Canada recently, and he had to swear allegiance to King Charles, the King of Canada, because Canada's in the Commonwealth. So he's not an Anglican as far as I know, but he has swear allegiance to King Charles with whatever way a 4-year-old can do that, you know. So historically, state religions have been really, really, really important in establishing national identity. It is the glue that holds countries together. And not just England. I mean, there's lots of state religions, lots of them around there. You can see this causing problems everywhere. Hinduism is the de facto state religion of India. And the current, I almost said something very pejorative, the current fella who is in charge of India, Modi, Prime Minister, is a devout Hindu nationalist who has done everything he could to deprive Muslims of their rights in India, based on the fact that India's identity is as a Hindu nation, period. You know, and we see this all around the world. I mean, lots of places in Europe and so forth. Yeah, India has about 10% Muslim, but it has more Muslims than almost any country in the world because India has such a large population. 110 million Muslims, I think, in India. Indonesia's got more. Malaysia is close. But what most people don't know is all the countries that have the most Muslims are not in the Middle East. It's India, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Indonesia's got the most, 175 million, I think. Anyway, a state religion implies that God is blessing the country, and the monarch or the president, whoever's in charge, prime minister, they're getting God's blessings directly because they are of the true faith, and their country is of the true faith, whatever that true faith happens to be. And if your nation is generally religious, this is a powerful glue that holds everything together, because if a believer in a religion wants to believe that they're doing what God wants them to do, you know, and that's what this is all about. It implies a uniformity of religion and usually ethnicity. So usually this applies to nation states. A nation state is a country that has basically one ethnicity, one religion, and so forth. There are very, very few of them. There used to be a lot. England used to be a nation state. It's not anymore. You know, the United States has never been a nation state. But the fact that England is not a nation state now is one of the reasons they're having this conversation in the UK about should we even have a monarch? Should the monarch be the head of the church? You know, so they're having that conversation now because it's not a nation state anymore, and it makes less and less sense, you know, to have these things. So the most revolutionary thing, I think, in the United States history is the First Amendment to the Constitution. This is a truly revolutionary statement, and I think is at the heart and soul of what the United States at least should be. And it reads like this: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or the prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, the press, the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. This is an amazingly powerful statement. In other words, the United States will not have a state religion, and from the very beginning we said we're not going to have a state religion. And in fact, the fact there was a state religion in England meant that those who didn't want to be part of the Anglican Church were going to be persecuted there, and a lot of those people came to the United States. So they're not going to want to have a state religion here either. But does the US have a de facto national religion? Do we have a de facto one? It's not overt, but is there a sense that there's a certain way that we're supposed to have a religious life? Only 2 of our 47 presidents were not Protestant. Only 2. And the majority of those 45 presidents who were Protestant were of a form of Protestant faith which was very conservative. That has become sort of the de facto national religion. So imagine somebody who is not religious running for president. How many votes would they get? Not many. Or a Jew, or a Muslim, or a Buddhist, or even Catholics have a tough road. So we sort of have a de facto state religion, but it's not overt. So let's look at the United States in the 19th century. Oh my gosh, I'm running out of time already. The 100-year period after our independence was a really tumultuous time for the United States. It was very difficult.
First 100 years always are.
They always are, because it's really, really hard to establish a country. It is not an easy thing to do. And we need to cut. We often say, oh, those African nations, they're all in turmoil. Why can't they get their act together? Blah, blah, blah. Well, they only became independent within our lifetimes. The first 100 years, I mean, they're doing the same thing the United States did. You know, it's hard to make a country. For example, the European countries were not at all sure we were going to make it. In 1806, the sitting vice president, Aaron Burr, conspired with our general in charge of all of our military to split the country into 2, causing probably a civil war, and with Aaron Burr becoming the president of the Western states, and Wilkinson would be the commander-in-chief of their armies. And this doesn't get taught much in American history because it's not, we'll talk about that in a minute. Wilkinson, by the way, was also a paid spy for Spain, you know, and he was spying for the Spanish and getting money for that, but that's another story. England tried to take us back as colonies in 1812. The War of 1812 resulted. We almost went to war with England in 1846, came very close. South Carolina almost seceded from the U.S. in 1831, 30 years before the Civil War. They came very close to seceding at that point. We managed to keep them in there, but they were the first to secede in 1860. That triggered the Civil War. We fought this unbelievably disastrous Civil War for 4 years. You know, this is not what stable countries do. What we were trying to do was work out our identity. And the Civil War was all about, are we going to be a slave country or a free country? That was critical to our identity. And it wasn't until the Civil War was over and that question was settled, and we expanded industrially in the next few decades, thanks to massive amounts of immigration who did all the labor for that industrial expansion. Only then did European countries start saying, okay, they're going to make it. So it took 100 years before we were finally on our feet as a country. And it was during this century, the 19th century, that we were trying to construct our identity as a country. Who are we, and who do we want other people to think we are? This was absolutely essential to ensure our survival, and without a state religion, what was going to be the glue that was going to hold us together? You know, we didn't have the state religion, which other countries had. So what are we going to do? The answer is civil religion. We developed a civil religion in the United States. And it was during the 19th century that our civil religion was created. It was emphasized and made more overt in the 20th century, but it was the 19th century where it was created. A very large part of our identity as a country, and for a lot of people, their identity as individuals comes from this construction of civil religion. And it's so ingrained that we're not even aware of it. You don't hear people talking about civil religion. You know, oh, that's part of our civil religion. Nobody talks that way. because it's just part of who we are. It's the way we always have been, it's the way we always will be, just the way things are. You don't think about it. It's just the way things are. But it's important to keep in mind it was consciously created in the 19th century. So here's a definition of civil religion by Robert Bellah, who's the foremost scholar on this. All the socio-religious values invested in the maintenance of a secular state. Socio-religious values. So who are we going to be? And let's get those out there and have everybody accept that. And that's going to be the glue that's going to hold us together. A society may renounce religion. This is another quote from Bellah. Society may renounce religion as a scaffolding for national identity. Comparable sentiments emerge in support of a social contract and celebrate the virtues of patriotism and civil obedience. In other words, we're not going to have a state religion, but we have similar kinds of things are going to emerge and be created for us, which are going to inculcate these values, patriotism and civil obedience, which are absolutely critical to have a stable state. So here's some characteristics of civil religion. It is not a religion in the traditional sense of the word. We're not worshiping, it's not an overt obedience to God. It's essentially a replacement for a state religion. It's especially strong in the US because we don't have a state religion. So it's a very strongly developed in the United States. And it provides the glue that holds us together. Traditionally, it has. It's a body of beliefs that are like completely ubiquitous. As I said, it's hard to emphasize how strongly it just is out there in the ether. And we just are absorbed by this completely and don't even think about it. But it touches every aspect of our institutional and our, in many cases, our institutional life, our individual lives. History is particularly important. Creating a history which supports the state religion is, the civil religion is really, really important. And we have done an admirable job of that. That's because identity is connected to the past so well. In politics, it determines which individuals and which groups are acceptable as politicians. Some people aren't acceptable, other people are, and civil religion tells you which is which. Economics, and this comes in the supremacy of capitalism, which is a very critical part of our civil religion, is adherence to capitalism. Individual and group experience, I was thinking of a couple of examples. Our obsession with guns and private vehicles, for example, which are more than any other culture on earth. It's a uniquely American thing to be obsessed with guns and obsessed with private vehicles. And this comes out of our civil religion. Okay, it's natural outgrowth of that. And we've created elements of our civil religion to support that because that's what people want to have supported in their civil religion. You know? A lot of mythology, the importance of the American dream, for example, which you hear about all the time. The American dream is a myth, you know, but it is an important statement about who we are and what we want the world to think we are. And there's lots of other mythology. Every country has their myths, and we have ours, for example. Another one we have is that we're a classless society. We're not a classless society at all. But we want to believe we are, and so we tell the world that. And we act as if we are sometimes, but we're not. So it was consciously created in the 19th century, reinforced in the 20th century. It's a belief system because it replaces the state religion, but the deity is not God, but rather the United States itself. This goes beyond normal patriotism. It's much more inclusive, encompassing, and pervasive than normal patriotism. It's often based on true events, but to be effective, it doesn't have to be. It can be just as effective on made-up stuff or half-truths All you got to do is get people to believe those made up things. And we do believe a lot of made up things. And that's happening more and more frequently nowadays. People are believing stuff that's being made up or is at best only half true. Yeah. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about right now. History is critical to this whole process. You have to have a history that supports the civil religion, right? Another scholar, who's a geographer, Kenneth Foote, said this is a wordy thing. Scholars don't know how to write, so people can read it. But basically says that history is not so much objective reality as it is something you invent to support your ideology, your civil religion. Okay? And then he says, civil religion as an ideological system can be expected to guide forcefully the invention of these interpretive traditions. So in other words, history is determined by our civil religion, basically. It has to support the civil religion. And it doesn't necessarily mean that all of our history is false. I mean, Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7th, 1941. That happened. And we did go to war because of that. That's all true. Okay? A lot of other things associated with that are kind of fuzzed, but that's true. And one quick example, George Washington and the Haudenosaunee. George Washington is a legitimate American hero, and I have got a lot of respect for George Washington. He was by far and away the single person most responsible for us winning the Revolutionary War. He was unbelievably brilliant in that war. I also respect him for his role as the first president, because he helped establish the presidency in ways which I think are appropriate. So he's a great guy, no doubt about that. And in fact, part of the construction of civil religion in the 1830s and 40s was an effort to try to make George Washington sort of a deity almost. He was the perfect American, and he was ideal for that because the country was being torn apart by slavery, and it was obviously headed for war. But George Washington was the ideal guy because he was a slave owner from the South. He lived in Virginia, but who was also deeply respected by the North for what he did in the Revolutionary War. So he made everybody like him. You don't name states after people who aren't really popular, But the history we cling to is subjective in the sense that it's not complete and it's not always expressed the way it really happened. And an example is what George Washington did with the Haudenosaunee. The Haudenosaunee is a confederation of Native American tribes in New York State. They're often called the Iroquois, but that's not the name they call themselves. They call themselves the Haudenosaunee. And George Washington ordered, during the Revolutionary War, he ordered these two generals, Sullivan and Clinton, to take a large armed force into the Haudenosaunee territory and completely destroy them. Burn all their villages, kill all the people you find, burn all their crops, drive them completely out of the state. And we know Washington actually said to do that because we have the original order was written on paper over his signature, which he signed, and we have that original paper. Basically, he ordered a scorched earth campaign against the Haudenosaunee. Now, this is not what you hear about George Washington. It doesn't fit the civil religion understanding of George Washington and all the good things he did. Even people in New York State are not taught this very much. So that's how civil religion can distort history. And if you bring that up, people accuse you of being un-American. What do you hate America? Well, it's just what happened, So it's largely created by the interpretation of events, institutions, and experiences. In other words, we attach meaning to these things, the things that have happened and gone on, And the meanings we attach are important and are really, really important. Those meanings may not be logical. They may not even be based on true events or only on partially true events. But they work as long as people believe them. And people are easily capable of believing illogical things. And so by the end of the 19th century, there was a generally accepted version of civil religion that had emerged in the United States, a kind of a consensus that most people bought into. And it was really important at the end of the 19th century to have this because the largest burst of immigration started in about 1890 and went for the next 30 years. And that was the biggest plug of immigration. And people were freaking out because all these strange people were coming in. So they wanted to make sure they had a civil religion so they knew what these immigrants were supposed to be thinking. They had to abide by the civil religion. That's when we started all the flag stuff, was in the 1890s. That's when the Pledge of Allegiance was written. That's when flags first ended up in classrooms, because they wanted these immigrants to pledge allegiance to the United States and to the flag, and the flag becomes a symbol of our civil religion. Those who don't accept the general consensus of the civil religion are deemed to be unpatriotic or un-American, and are often socially or spatially marginalized. And this is the way it's been all through our history. For example, the US soccer team, women's soccer team, they won the World Cup in 2015, 2019, but they were called un-American and not patriotic because they sued their parent organization for gender disparity, because that organization went on record as saying that men deserve more money because women are less skilled and have less demanding roles. And they freaked out and they sued them, and people said, that's not right. This violated civil religion here by doing this. And we'll get to that in a minute. Also, some of them didn't sing the national anthem, and this woman knelt during the national anthem to promote racism. So, promoting racism? Protesting, did I say promoting? Protesting racism. I apologize to her because that's not what was. Protesting racism. So protesting racism was not part of American civil religion. And it bothered them because it seemed to be disrespectful to the flag, which was the symbol of that civil religion. The team went on to play very poorly in the 2023 Women's World Cup. I don't think if this had anything to do with that or not. They just didn't play very well. So part of the consensus narrative of civil religion that developed in the 19th century and is still strong today are assumptions about the kinds of people who make up real members of the United States. These are the heart of the civil religion, and they're characterized this way: Anglo-Saxon ethnicities, Protestant Christianity, male gender, and heterosexual orientation. This is what you have to be fully involved traditionally in the American civil religion. Yeah.
Ironically enough, that's not what we proclaim, though.
We don't proclaim that at all. See,
we are like, oh, the United States, we are like a salad, or like we proclaim that we're diverse. But I'm not arguing with this.
But you're absolutely right. We've always proclaimed that.
We proclaim one thing, but yet
the reality, and that's why I said civil religion does not have to be based in reality, as long as you believe it. And so what we mean is people who had these characteristics constructed civil religion, constructed America, and built it for their benefit. Okay? So of the 47 US presidents, 44 hit all 4 of these characteristics. The other 3 each missed on one characteristic only. Kamala Harris was the first major party candidate in American history to miss on 2 of those. So her defeat was almost foreordained because she just didn't fit American civil religion. Yeah. No, they're not. In fact, we're going to make that point with the next slide. But they're not written anywhere. No, absolutely not. But people who are successful politically often emphasize these things about themselves because it works. Yeah. Right.
Were those three mostly in the last 50 years?
They were all in the last recent times. 2 Catholics and a black man.
Who's the other? So JFK, who's the other?
Joe Biden. Joe Biden's Catholic, see? So, and then, of course, Obama was black. So.
Still is one.
Is he?
Still is one.
I think he was like Kamala Harris. He could choose to be black or choose not to be black, and he was choosing. Here's the constitutional requirements for the American presidency. There are 3 of them. You have to be a natural-born citizen of the United States, be 35 years old, and have been a resident of the United States for 14 years, which means all of us, except for Jordan, could be president. And you could be president in another 20 years. So I'll vote for you. You got my vote right now if I'm still alive in 20 years. But all of us could be president. We're all qualified according to the Constitution.
And going back, sorry, going back to the other one. So part of like thinking about political campaigns is really attacking those parts where you don't fit in with the.
Exactly. And you're creating an identity for somebody else, somebody who's, they don't say it this way, but they're basically saying they don't fit civil religion. They don't fit what you've always believed about the United States. And Kamala Harris got a lot of that, an awful lot of that.
Okay.
So in keeping with the First Amendment, there's no religious requirement for the presidency or any other elected office, and there's also no gender, ethnic, or sexual preference requirement. So approximately 25% of the US is Catholic. We've had 4% of our presidents have been Catholic. 50% of the US is female, no woman has been president. 38% of the US is non-white, 2% of our presidents have been a person of color. 78% of approximately LGBTQ. No out person has ever been president. We had one who almost certainly was gay, but he was very closeted, James Buchanan. But he was very closeted, so it was not an issue. So, you know, it just simply doesn't reflect the United States because much of the United States doesn't reflect our civil religion, the traditional civil religion. So assuming that only certain kinds of people are part of the civil religion and therefore represent the true identity of the United States has led to discrimination, hostility, and marginalization of a lot of people. Traditionally women, people of color, people of we'll say alternative sexualities, whatever, okay? And so you have the Black Lives Matter. They're trying to make the point, our lives matter too. You know, I mean, white lives have always mattered. They're trying to say, what about our lives? They're just trying to join the civil religion is what they're basically trying to do. So, oh geez, maybe we should skip this. I was going to do an example of eliminating people from traditional civil religion. Okay, what is the oldest continuously occupied city in the United States? When I was in school, I was always taught it was St. Augustine, Florida, built in 1565, continuously occupied ever since. It became an Anglo city in 1819 and a state in 1845. It's not true. Not at all true. There's all kinds of Native American cities that have been continuously occupied way longer. Acoma Pueblo is the oldest of these. From the 1100s, it's been continuously occupied. The reason why it's not the correct answer Native Americans are not part of the civil religion. In fact, they have been the opponents of civil religion in the popular press and imagination and perception. So they don't count. Their cities don't count. And to acknowledge that as the oldest city would mean you have to incorporate Native Americans into the civil religion, which a lot of people haven't wanted to do in the past and still don't want to do today. It also means giving up some of the stereotypes we have constructed about Native Americans. None of these are true, by the way. They were not city dwellers. They were too primitive and lacking in technology to build and maintain a city or figure out how to do agriculture in the deserts and all these kinds of things. Only white people could do that, right? And it would mean if we acknowledge that they had a city there for almost 1,000 years, now 900 years, that would expose the lie of all these perceived things we believe about them. This is Acoma. So changing civil religion. Oh, gotta get through this. It's really hard to change civil religion. And here's some reasons why. It's fundamental to the heart of national identity and personal identity for a lot of people. So if you change, really changing your identity is the hardest thing anybody ever does. Really hardest thing anybody's ever does. It can be soul-wrenching, requires intense and conscious examination of the self, abandoning things that made up who you are, who you want other people to think you are, and that applies to the country as well. We've configured ourselves in terms of history, policy, infrastructure, institutions, and ideology to support and maintain our civil religion. So we got to change all those things, institutions and all kinds of things, and that's hard. It's really wrecks people's psyche to make those kinds of changes. Those who came to power in the traditional institutions don't want to change those institutions because that's where their power came from. So you're not going to look to elected leaders, usually, for change. People embrace cultural inertia, means it's easiest to simply assume the way things are, the way things always have been, the things always will be. It's just too much hard work to try to change it. It's just easier to watch something on TV, So, or what? It's a status, the status quo is okay. So again, when we talk about changing civil religion, these points recall traditional civil religion is the essential glue that holds the United States together. Changing that is genuinely scary to a lot of people, which was a major issue in this last election, was how scared people were of changing civil religion. It can make people feel like the country is coming apart. And often when it happens, people who feel frightened by changing civil religion will double down and hold to the traditional beliefs even more strongly because it's what they are and they just can't imagine not being that or a world where that doesn't exist. We're not going to do this, but I have another example from Native Americans. We're not going to do this, so we'll go through that. So there's current issues. Increasingly in the last 4 decades, we'll say 4 or 5 decades, there's been efforts to change the American civil religion by including elements that were not traditional parts of our old civil religion. The goal was to expand the identity of Americans by providing a more diverse and historically accurate civil religion. Not getting rid of civil religion, but making it more reflective of America. This has been at the very core of political and cultural divisiveness that's so prevalent in the United States society. Generally speaking, and this is very general, Republicans want the traditional civil religion and Democrats want the new one. That's generally what's going on. And that's at the heart of what the so-called culture wars and the so-called, and the political divisiveness and all the things that happen. And it's at the very core of the recent election. This was the absolute issue at the most recent election. Changing is always met with a lot of strong resistance. And you see what's happening in the country efforts to restrict the teachings of slavery, racism, Native American genocide in classrooms, because control of history is critical to the maintenance of civil religion, absolutely critical. The anti-immigrant feeling in the United States. Immigrants have always been viewed as outsiders to traditional civil religion, always. Efforts to restrict health care for women and trans people who are not part of traditional civil religion. Banning of diversity and inclusion in education and other places in society. These are pushbacks by people who want the traditional civil religion. And I think we're about done, but I think Chris made a comment, and I almost went to this quote earlier because it was exactly what you said. But here's a quote from Molly Ivins, who's one of the Texas journalist, who's one of my heroes. It is possible to read the history of this country as one long struggle to extend the liberties established in our Constitution to everyone in America. I think you were saying that we think of ourselves as being diverse and all this kind of stuff. We want that to be what people see in us, but the reality is not. She's saying this is basically our long time struggle, is trying to take the Constitution and apply it to everybody. And along that line with the Constitution, this is the last slide, but along that line in the Constitution, there is a growing, strengthening movement to call a constitutional convention, to rewrite the Constitution. And it's mostly coming from people who want to enshrine traditional civil religion in the Constitution. So it's going to be interesting to see if that happens. It's a really difficult process to do that, and it takes the input of all the states, and I'm not sure they'll ever get all the states to agree to this. So it may not happen, but there's people, a lot of people, who are really interested in doing this. That would be making our country, as Chris pointed out, our Constitution doesn't necessarily support traditional civil religion. And what they want to do is make the Constitution support traditional civil religion.
I think it's interesting that you say it that way, because I would imagine that part of our civil religion and its sacred scripture is the Constitution.
Yeah, and everybody says the Constitution is the gold standard. But it's like the Bible. Everybody says the Bible is the Word of God, but they don't live by it.
Well,
and everybody says the Constitution is the gold standard, but they don't live by it. You know.
And I think I agree with you. The folks that would want to change it would have a lot of pushback, because there are another set of folks that say, no, that's sacred. Don't you be messing with it.
Exactly.
I would be surprised if we have any more amendments, quite frankly.
It's going to be really hard to get amendments. I mean, we couldn't even get an amendment in place that gave women equal rights.
Right.
That was something which was so contrary to American traditional civil religion that we still don't have that in our Constitution. And New Zealand put it in their Constitution in 1902. So we're 120 years behind New Zealand on this one, and other countries have. We can't even do that. So I think you're right. Amendments are going to be really, really hard to get through. And changing the whole Constitution is going to be even harder. Yeah. That's all I got. I'm done. And only 10 minutes late. That's about par for the course for me. Only because I skipped some stuff, right? Thanks, Matt.